I think the biggest myth, I guess I represent the nonprofit world for to some extent. I guess the biggest myth about nonprofits is that they're inefficient and not interested in business approaches, tried and true business approaches. It's wrong because they actually are extremely most nonprofits strive to be as organized and as clear-headed and as plan-oriented as possible.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Ramin Sedehi, and that's as close as I'll probably get to pronouncing it right. But Ramin, we're going to talk a little bit about strategic transformation and what that means and how you go about doing it. Also looking at how it relates to doing nonprofits, and also in the bigger picture, dealing with the uncertainty and complexity of business, and also how you prepare yourself, both the structure of the business and the mind and your mindset for that uncertainty and complexity. So should be some great conversation, and definitely excited to have you on. And with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Ramin.
Well, thank you very much, Devin, and it's great to be here again and have an opportunity to chat about a bunch of things. Just a few things about myself so folks know kind of where I come from. I have spent probably 35 years leading organizations, higher education, academic medicine organizations, so mostly all in nonprofit sector and also NGOs. And over these years, I've had the great fortune to work with some fantastic people who are very committed to our communities and the world at large. And so it's always humbling to be able to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been able to do. So I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Awesome. Well, definitely a great introduction, and excited to have you on and have a good discussion. So, so with that kind of, maybe the point to start out with was, and one that we talked a little bit before the podcast, was with regards to strategic transformation. And I think that's, something that people could maybe guess at a bit as to what it means or what it might entail, but maybe to help out the audience, give us a bit of an idea. What does that mean, and how do you go about doing it?
Great, great. I think it's a topic that a lot of people have on their minds, which I thought would be helpful for this conversation. We hear the word strategic all the time. Everyone wants to be strategic. I don't think anyone says, I don't want to be strategic. Businesses, nonprofits, entities, organizations, they all have this affinity for the word strategic. But what does it really mean? In some ways, it's translated into plans and very complicated charts and what have you. And really, I think the simplest way to think about it is saying you're going to do something X, and that is your strategy. Now, what is often missing in a lot of strategic conversations is what you're not going to do. Because if you're trying to be strategic, then there are things you won't do. So that's one of the first really steps, is to kind of hone in on what is it that you want to do and accomplish as an entity. Transformation is another word we love to use. We love to use the word transformation because it sounds really good. It gets people excited. But transformation really is about changing direction. It's about doing something different than you were doing before. It's not doing what you're doing much better. That's something else. But to really change, to really go from a startup, for example, just looking at the wall behind you, a startup has a transformational moment when it decides to become a company versus a IP that it sells to the highest bidder. So that's a transformational moment. That is now at that moment the group of 4 or 5 people have gotten together, are now making a decision about what is it we're going to be 10 years from now or 5 years from now or whatever their time frame that they would like to see appreciable progress. So I think part of what I help a lot of organizations and where I've been is to first define the words so that we're all on the same page. And transformation begins with a vision. So you have to have a vision. You have to say, not just like, here's what we're doing, we're going to do it better, but here's a vision of where we're going to be. We're going to be a 200-person company building this and that, serving these communities or these markets. And then a very easy step is to create a framework. So with all transformation, or with all large-scale action, a framework really helps us. So when we were, for example, at Chemists Without Borders in this last year, as we were working through our strategic transformation, we built a framework around 4 components: service, innovation, education, and connection. So this, in a way, becomes what we're driving toward. It's if you want to think of it as the 4 pillars that hold up the house that we're trying to build. So instead of plans which have a long time to come to fruition, have a lot of conversations around them, lots of people are needed, focusing more on a framework allows everyone to be much more constructive in a faster time frame. Another step in the transformation process is values. So that's part of the other aspect. Is what are the values that we hold dear in our organization? And that is kind of the guardrails, if you will, that allows you to move forward without falling too far out of your expected values. So that's part of what it takes with strategic transformation, is to really think very carefully about the initial stages, as opposed to just, it's a job, let's get it done, let's just put something on paper, let's move forward. It actually is very fundamental to everything that's going to happen after it.
Now, one of the things that you said that I thought was interesting is, even within the, looking at strategic and looking at that, it's as much as what you don't do is, where you don't do, or you don't say, or you don't take action on, is what you do. Now, how do you go about deciding, maybe help us understand that a bit more, kind of give us an example as to what are some of the things maybe you shouldn't do, or that you should exclude or shouldn't consider.
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually much harder to do than because everything that an organization has been doing has some advocates. So that's one of the challenges. So it has some advocates. It has advocates that have been doing that, have invested in that, perhaps have been coming in to work on that, and that's a challenge. So, for example, at Chemists Without Borders, one of the strategic aspects for us was, well, there's a lot of issues with humanitarian in the humanitarian crisis that faces many communities, but we can't do all of them. So we had people working on air quality issues. We had people working on environmental and sustainability issues. And what we have decided as a strategic focus, is we're going to focus on water quality. So that is a focus. Now, that I can't tell you that everyone loves it. I can tell you that we have people who are saying, wait a second, we should be working on some of these other things. But that is part of the hard part of strategy. You already, for example, in your business, you've already decided that you're in IP business. You've strategized. You're not doing other stuff. So, but imagine you came into a firm that was doing many different aspects of law. They were specializing in many different aspects of law. And part of your job was to strategize toward 1 or 2 areas. So there's been an old adage that says the status quo has an army of defenders. So that army of defenders of the things that have been going on are part of what a strategist has to be aware of and work with as they're trying to focus the organization, create that strategy.
No, it makes perfect sense. Now, walk us through a little bit because you talked and you've already touched on it and hit on that if you're to go down the route of nonprofits, is that impacted or changed things or adjusted at all when you're looking at how you might do that strategic transformation? Is it the same as for-profit businesses? Or is there any different considerations to take into account?
There are many similarities, but there are some differences. Nonprofits, or another word that we often use for nonprofits, we call them mission-driven organizations, have missions, and missions are often very amorphous and very messy things. Like, how do you know you've done enough good? How do you know you've educated enough? How do you know when you have reached or solved some humanitarian problem? Because humanitarian problems by nature do not have a solution. They do not get solved. We don't solve poverty. We don't solve hunger. We intervene and make some things better. So part of the challenge that nonprofits have is figuring out how to strategize on their mission, which best way to do that is to narrow your mission so that you can actually be successful in the areas that you are focused on, which is, as I said earlier, for example, we are focusing on water, not that other problems don't exist. For-profits have a different problem, which is that there are many ways to make money. So which way do you want to make money? Which way do you want to be? What are your other values that you're trying to accomplish? So for-profits, really the question becomes, how do you strategize on the values that you want to bring to your community? And that allows you to say no to some things because they don't add value to what you're trying to do. And now again, this is a challenge. Privately held companies have an easier time doing this because it really is one or two or three owners who are basically making a decision. Publicly held companies have a harder time as shareholder value becomes more critical to the decision-making process. Thus, values and other factors have to adjust to that. But again, I think it's about saying, okay, so what do we really want to be the best at, and how do we get there?
No, makes sense, and it's definitely some good things to consider and bring into perspective as far as some of the differences between the nonprofit and the for-profit type of endeavors. So. Well, along those lines, but maybe shifting gears just a little bit, because another one of the areas that we touched on a bit before was, as you're going into a business, whether it's a nonprofit, for-profit, or whatever type of business it is, there's always the issue or requirement that you have to deal with uncertainty and complexities of the business. This is part of the nature of doing a business. And yet I think, sometimes that can be more difficult, whether it's how you structure the business to incorporate, to anticipate that or to be flexible to it, or to adjust your own mindset to not always having the answers and not everything not being straightforward. But how do you go about kind of, preparing yourself, the mindset in the business for that uncertainty and the complexity?
So this is really an important point that we are all facing because of something that happened a couple of years ago with the pandemic. It was the biggest uncertainty ever thrown into any aspect of our business world, our organizational world in the modern times. And we've had recessions and we've had other economic crises, but this was something very, very different. This was a health crisis, economic crisis, a organizational crisis. So, military has a term that they have coined called VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and adversity, that they basically make their plans around. And this has made its way to the business world. I guess I like to think of it slightly differently, that uncertainty exists all the time. We don't really know what the future is going to be. There are no experts on the future, as they say. We make assumptions about past trends, and we move forward with future plans. what we found during the both as management leaders and others, what we found in the crisis were organizations who did some of this better than others, who came out of uncertainty of the pandemic better than others. What do they have? So organizations that are extremely top down, where the knowledge and expertise sits at the top, generally did the worst, because this is one of the factors about uncertainty is no one knows. So expertise doesn't play as big a role as for example, organizations that have more of a matrix structure, where they were able to benefit from multiple perspectives and multiple local views of what's going on. The other aspect is that I think it's very critical. In fact, one of my books that I've written is about emotional maturity and leadership, is emotional maturity of an organization. To what extent trust exists? To what extent courage exists within an organization? And courage as defined by the willingness to try things. I'm not talking about people standing in front of another military taking shots. It's really simply the willingness to try things. To what extent does humility exist within an organization? The knowledge that you don't know everything, and thus you're open to learning from others. And to what extent is there confidence in the people who are working together? There is a term called that deals with how well can people face and discuss ideas without the fear of consequences that changes one group from another. A group that is willing to throw ideas out and have them heard is going to have many more ideas than a group that throws ideas out and somebody says, nope, we're not going to do that. No, that can't happen. No, that's a stupid idea. Hopefully nobody these days uses those phrases, but it happens even without using the phrases. You just look at the eyes. One of the things I do when I go into a new organization to diagnose kind of problem is I sit around and see what happens when I ask people questions in a group of VPs. If they look at the boss before they answer, I can tell you that there is very little trust there. If they can just answer and be, without doing that tells me, okay, well, there's some basics there. The other aspect, which I want to talk a little bit about, is about a movement away from management to leadership. Now, let me try to first say why this is necessary. We have confused and confounded the management and leadership words together. We use them all the time, and we don't really mean what we are saying. We'll call many organizational managers leaders, and leaders managers, and they're not always the same thing. So a management is a position that someone has either been given, or is the owner. Leadership, on the other hand, is something that one earns. It is something that is not tied to a position. Of course, if you're the CEO, you have a great opportunity to also be a leader, but it does not mean you are one if you don't behave as such. So in uncertainty and volatility and complexity, leadership is what matters much more than management, because management is about a defined set of outcomes, is about a defined process, is knowledge-based and expertise-based. Well, in uncertainty, there is no knowledge, right? Imagine you're in the middle of an airplane, and there's the pilot and the folks in the cockpit, but out in the main cabin is basically there are no experts. Everybody is just the same. But who's going to take leadership? Who's going to do something about improving? So it's not a position, but rather the ability to take that. Now, why does that matter in uncertainty? Leadership matters because leadership is primarily about relationships and people. and let me say this again, it really is about relationships and people. It's not about things. Leaders don't really focus on the things. They're focusing on each person, their connection to another person, and their connection to an ideal or an action or an orientation. And that's why in uncertainty, it's so important. Leadership in a military sense is critical, because if the soldiers don't feel that their captain on the field has leadership qualities, they don't have to pay attention to that person. The chain of command breaks down. And so the critical aspect is this separation, that an individual who's perhaps been functioning in a management role, but now they're thrown into uncertainty, has to kind of change their mindset. You said this yourself at the beginning. You have to change your mindset. You have to really think about the issues in front of you more from the people perspective than from, okay, what do I know? How do I get the most out of these people? How do I get them to tell me what they know? And that's what begins. Many of the great innovative ideas that happened during the pandemic came from line workers, people who are out there who say, well, we can do this. We don't have to, we can get this product from this area. That's because each of those people took some leadership role. So that's kind of what I think can really add value to an organization that is going through uncertainty, is to change their mindset, change the dynamics of the organization, so that they can get more information coming in, more people engaged, and have a spirit of experimentation, because uncertainty means that you don't know what's going to work, so try a bunch of different things and see what works.
No, I think that's definitely some great piece of advice and guidance and takeaway. And with that, we're already reaching towards the end of the podcast, and I feel like we've only just barely scratched the surface. So we're definitely going to have you back on, and you're continue on with the conversation and have a good discussion. But for today's episode, I do always like to wrap up each episode with the same question. So we're going to jump to that now, which is, if you're to go to your industry and look at it, what is the biggest myth and why is it wrong?
I think the biggest myth, I guess I represent the nonprofit world to some extent. I guess the biggest myth about nonprofits is that they're inefficient and not interested in business approaches, tried and true business approaches. It's wrong, because they actually are extremely, most nonprofits strive to be as organized and as clear-headed and as plan-oriented as possible. It's wrong because efficiency means something different. Imagine if a fire department was efficient. Now, if it was a business, it would say, I'm sorry, Devin, your house is 10 miles out of our efficient radius of dealing with a fire and getting back to the fire station within the minutes that we are required to be back, because we have to be ready for others. So they wouldn't be at your house. Or we can only spend 25 minutes at your house because that's the amount of time that we have. We kind of see this a little bit in healthcare, where I'm sure, with a few exceptions perhaps, we all have fairly tough interactions in the healthcare system. We see the doctor for 3 minutes, if that long. We are very impersonable, because efficiency in nonprofits can go very wrong very fast. And so I think the biggest myth is that they're not efficient or they're not agile. They're agile in a different way. I know universities, for example, right now are under fire. A lot of stuff that we read in the news. But if you think about it, it's an industry that's been in business since the 12th century, in the modern era. There was universities in the prehistoric times, BC time. But since 12, what business do we have that's been the same since the 12th century that's been in business? So many of the universities in this country have been around for 350, 400 years. So there is a different goal with nonprofits, which is often misunderstood by for-profit mindset, and that's I love to always expand on that so that people can see that no, they're there for a different purpose, and they have a different longevity that we're looking at.
Awesome. Well, definitely a great myth to dispel, and also a great amount of insight. So thank you for walking us through that. So with that, now as we do wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
You can contact me on my LinkedIn, or you can contact me on ramin.sedehi@gmail.com, and would love to continue the conversation with you.
Awesome. We'll definitely encourage people to reach out, support a great business, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again, Ramin, for coming on the podcast. And with that, now for all of you listeners are out there, if you can help us to share these journeys with even more startups and small businesses with expertise to help them along their journey to success, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review. Helps us to reach even more startups and small businesses along their journey to success. And on that note, if along your journey you ever need help with patents or trademarks or anything else with your startup, your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Great. Thank you very much.